President Obama is asking Congress for $2 billion today to deal with the flood of Latin American children illegally crossing into the U.S. Meanwhile, there's growing frustration among Texas churches that want to help those children. As Heather Sells reports, they're waiting to hear just how the federal government will use them, and they're hoping that they'll soon be able to minister directly to these kids.
Many Texas churches have known for months about the tidal wave of immigrant children crossing the border. Already this year, Border Patrol agents have detained more than 50,000.
Children as young as 6 are crossing the border here on their own, spurred on in many cases by parents who fear for their lives back home in Central America.
At their annual state meeting this month, Hispanic Baptist leaders took time out to pray at the border. Their concern, the safety and salvation of these kids. Their frustration, no way to connect with or minister to them. The hope that ongoing conversation with the White House will lead to that access.
We have an army of chaplains. We have an army of disaster relief trained people. We have an army of children's ministers and leaders who have background checks, who are ready.
In the border town of McAllen, Pastor Chad Mason works the phones daily, trying to find ways to help these children and fielding calls from churches that want to help. He knows firsthand the need because many Border Patrol agents worship at his church.
They tell us the stories of kids who are in their care, who are traumatized from what they've seen, or they're incredibly impoverished. And you just wonder, well, how are you dealing with that? Because we know the Border Patrol is not designed to be a child care facility.
Right now, Border Patrol agents are detaining kids for as many as 14 days, a condition human rights activists say is unacceptable. By law, however, agents cannot quickly return children from Central America back to their home countries. They must screen them as potential trafficking victims or refugees. That leaves thousands of kids stranded in Border Patrol stations for days, and after that, in Health and Human Service facilities for possibly months.
That's what breaks our hearts. We know that there's a need. And at this point, we have no access to try to care for that need.
One way that churches right now are helping is by simply doing laundry. This bedding here is for women and children who are just coming from Border Patrol stations and are about to head out on buses to wherever their destination is.
The Border Patrol releases immigrant women with their children at bus stations across South Texas. With their deportation hearings months away, they're free to go for now, though by some estimates, huge numbers of them will never show up. Calvary Baptist and other churches are working with Catholic charities in McAllen and Brownsville to care for these families. They're often in dire need of food, medical care, and clean clothes.
We don't foresee this ending anytime very soon.
This week, the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference has begun to work with Latin American churches to urge parents not to send their children to the United States. The goal, reduce the number of unaccompanied children at the border to 0 by year's end. In the meantime, Texas churches are standing by, ready to help those who do decide to come.
In the future, we'll have to figure out what's right, what's wrong, and those kinds of things. But biblically, we're going to love people right now. We need to share that love and compassion to those who need it the most.
And Heather has just returned from the U.S.-Mexico border and joins us now. Heartbreaking all the way around. So Heather, what's going to happen to all these kids in the coming months?
Well, right now, as I was mentioning in the story, they're in these Border Patrol stations and they're only supposed to stay for 72 hours by law, but it's going to 14 days in some cases. So they're looking at temporary facilities in Texas and other states, and they're hoping that the church will encourage communities to welcome these kids and not give the pushback like they did in California last week.
Yeah, we're seeing those protests. Many people want to know, why not just send these kids right back where they came from?
Well, if they are Mexican, they can't send them right back. But if they're from Central America, they need to go before an immigration judge. That judge needs to determine, are they a trafficking victim, or perhaps are they victims of gang violence and they do qualify for asylum? They could be considered a refugee. So there is a legal process that needs to take place, and that, of course, takes time.
Now, once the churches get the green light, how may they be able to help these kids?
It's interesting because there are groups like Texas Baptist Men, they're humanitarian relief groups, their volunteers have background checks, they're trained, and they can go in and physically help these kids and provide spiritual counsel. And so, of course, that is what they are hoping to do.
Yeah, we're both parents. Many people find this hard to understand. Why do parents send their kids across the border?
Right. Well, there's a couple of factors that have come together. And one is a lot of parents, of course, have thought for years, could I get my kid away from these terrible conditions where we live? Or parents in the U.S., could I bring my child who's living with grandma in Latin America to me? And they started hearing that the policies were a little more relaxed, and they said now is the time. So kind of a combination of factors. But what's interesting is that Samuel Rodriguez, the president of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, said this week, hey, you know what? They could come here and get involved in drug gangs here as well. So parents, please do not send your kids.
Raises yet more concerns. What can people do who'd like to help these children?
Well, there are practical needs, as you were seeing, clothing, just money to help buy food and other such things. So there is a website. It is the South Texas, I think we're putting it up on the screen here. You can see it, the southtexasrefugees.org website, and it's a lot of faith groups and the Salvation Army, et cetera, that are listing the practical needs and the updates on this website.
Excellent reporting. Thank you so much, Heather.